Good morning to all from the editorial board of BuildUp. If you attend a BuildUp webinar for the first time, welcome. And for our usual audience, it's a pleasure to have you again here. And today we host this session dedicated to innovative business models and smart financing. This webinar has been proposed and organized by STUNNING Project team. So many thanks to STUNNING Project, and likewise I invite you all to contribute and participate to BuildUp. In fact, BuildUp is a collaborative platform in the field of energy efficiency in building, and it's continuously updated by the editorial team, but you can also register and become a member of the community, and you can upload the news, events, you can present your case studies, results from your projects, and so on. And if you navigate the portal, you'll find different sections. And in particular, I invite you to explore the section Learn, where you'll find the podcast of the past webinars, and you can listen to all the previous presentations. I remind you also next appointment on the 8th of April, we'll host a webinar in collaboration with Eurace titled Assessing the Energy Performance of a Building, Put Energy Efficiency First. And in home page, you can find the agenda and how to register. Well, now I would let the floor to Karine Lafont. She will present the agenda and she will moderate the webinar. Remember, you can ask questions typing in the box on the right side of the screen, and the questions will be answered in a final slot after all the presentations. Please, Karine, the stage is yours.
Many thanks, Julia. Hello, everyone. I'm Karine Lafont-Éloire, coordinator of the STUNNING project. Welcome to our STUNNING webinar on innovative business model and smart financing for the deep renovation of European buildings. Okay, trying to move my slides, sorry. Looking like it's not working. Okay, working now. Okay, so 40 to 45% of Europe's energy come from buildings. So the building sector is one of the key enablers for achieving low carbon economic goals. However, the annual rate of home and commercial building renovation is well under the 3% that will be required to achieve these European goals. So there is a need to accelerate investments in energy efficiency to boost cost-effective building renovation benefiting all European citizens. Promising business models and financing solutions are already being tested and implemented in Europe and globally. How are they implemented and why are they effective? How can these business models be better replicated across Europe? What are the opportunities for investors and cities leading the clean energy transitions? Those are the questions that we will try to answer today. After a short introduction of the STUNNING project, Lorenzo Dall'Oro from STUNNING partner RENA Consulting will give an overview of the business models to finance the deep refurbishment of buildings that have been analyzed by STUNNING. Two of these business models will then be presented in more details. First by Edward Puig-McLean for the Europace project, and then for Joe Southernwood from ERC for the Novice project. And we'll then finish by a few concluding slides. So let me start now with a short overview of STUNNING. Okay. Sorry, went too far on this. Okay, so STUNNING stands for Sustainable Business Models for the Deep Renovation of Buildings. It's a coordination and support action. It started in 2017 and it will end in September this year. Its objective is to accelerate the adoption of new business models for energy efficient buildings based on integrated, adaptable and affordable refurbishment packages. And another key aspect of this project is to engage with stakeholders of the building value chain. Our approach is summarized in this diagram. So we first review refurbishment cases and demonstrations throughout Europe, as well as their financing mechanisms. In parallel, barriers that slow down replication have been analyzed, and recommendations on how to address them have been established. Innovative business models have then been identified, and we are now in the process of promoting the most promising one and illustrating them through detailed case studies. All the produced knowledge, so on the refurbishment packages, on the promising business models, on case studies, is shared with the stakeholder community on a knowledge share platform that we call the Renovation Hub. This Renovation Hub is a collaborative platform that has the objective of sharing knowledge on renovation packages and business models for the energy efficient refurbishment of buildings. It provides a neutral and quality checked information, and we have the objective of sustaining it beyond the end of the project. Going back to business models and smart financing, Stunning has gone through an extensive process of analyzing innovative business models for building refurbishment. And as said, we are now in the process of selecting and promoting the most promising ones. And now I leave the floor to Lorenzo Dall'Oro from RINA, who will present the first findings of Stunning and what was the conclusion of this analysis. Okay, so Lorenzo.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lorenzo Dall'Oro from RINA Consulting. We are partners of the Stunning project, and we are in charge of the business models activities. I'm going to present you our findings on the business models for the deep renovation of buildings. Just trying to change the slide. Okay. So, our objective is to promote the implementation of innovative and original business models targeting energy efficient renovation of buildings across all Europe. We started from the analysis of the scenario, identifying innovative services and products to provide business models to the stakeholders of the building sector. So we analyze these stakeholders' needs, the barriers to overcome, and available technologies on the market. Then we are validating this business model through real cases of implementations, the so-called business cases that will be selected to cover different built environment, both from geographical and we can say type of ownership of each building. To promote these promising business models through dissemination, material, and we are going to try to generate a common awareness of the success cases. At first, we have done a landscape analysis on the business models in order to identify and evaluate the business models already existing for the building's deep renovation for different types of stakeholders and to be validated through real cases of implementation. We create a business models database and we aim to stimulate the collection of data and to find potentially uncovered business cases and target markets. We have selected basic criteria for replicability to identify what business model is more replicable and adaptable across Europe. To do this, we started from an in-depth desktop analysis, and this led to the selection of a limited number of basic families of business models from which we started for the identification of the most innovative ones. The business model clustering led to the selection of 3 main families of business models, as you can see from this slide. We have the business model based on the one-stop shop concept. So basically, a single actor offering the full services of a holistic renovation, including consulting, energy audit, the renovation work, and also financing. So a single actor managing the entire work. Then we have the business model based on product service systems. So where the offer relate an energy product with relevant services, for example, renewable energy technologies and related services. The most prominent example of this are the energy service companies' business models. Then we have the business model based on new financing schemes that are based on financing schemes provided by private capital providers, so not burdening government budget. And finally, we have the business model based on new and innovative revenues models, based on the intelligent use of available government incentives, which contribute to the revenues, but also other models of business based on other remuneration schemes, as for example the crowdfunding model and the green label model. In the following slide, we can see the selected business models subcategories. So, for example, for the one-stop shop concept, we have the contractor cluster cooperation scheme, the step-by-step approach, the private-public partnership, and so on. For the second type of business model, so business models in which the energy service companies are involved, we have the energy supply contracting, the energy performance contracting, and the integrated energy contracting. Then for the business model based on new financing schemes, we have energy savings obligations, the PACA, the property assets clean energy. Then we have the on-bill financing and the leasing of renewable energy equipment. Finally, for the new and innovative revenue models, as already said, we have the crowdfunding and the business model based on the green building label, or the feed-in remuneration schemes. All these business model subcategories have been in-depth analyzed and described and are available on the Renovation Hub. For each of them, we selected real cases and innovative cases of implementation. I reported here just some of the examples of the real cases of implementation, the so-called innovative ones, as selected during the activity. Each of the business model has been characterized utilizing this basic approach. So each of them has been characterized through its own added value and describing how are the stakeholders of the value chain involved in this business model, what types of technologies and refurbishment packages are being part of the model, who are the type of ownership involved, and what type of buildings are targeted. And finally, a focus was given to the economic and financial aspect of each one. The business models have been also characterized by their geographical context of application in order to have some guidelines of what are the geographical areas more suitable for a certain business model, and what are the burden for replicability of each one of them. We analyze potential improvements and innovative application, doing also a SWOT analysis. So basically, to identify the most promising one, several parameters were evaluated, but no parameter was considered so relevant to justify the selection of one business model as the most promising rather than another one. So finally, we select the geographical coverage and the replicability for single or more typology of buildings as the key parameters for business models' innovative peculiarity. Finally, we select different examples of most promising business models for each of the four geographical areas of Europe, based on the previously explained criteria, and this will be matched with the barriers that we are going to evaluate and the market mechanisms of each of the countries. So, what's next? Starting from the most promising business models selected, we are now selecting the real cases of applications of each of them. So we are collecting data of real cases of business, and this will permit to show the results, the outputs, and the performances of real application of the most promising business models, with also reference to economic aspects and geographical covering. This will permit to extract driving features, guidelines, best practices at the basis of the efficiency of the business models. As already explained by Karim Lafon, all these informations are available on the Renovation Hub. Both the business models, the case studies of our selection. We also invite you to share other material concerning the real cases of implementation of business models through our Renovation Hub. So, thank you everyone for your attention. I can leave the floor to Karine to introduce the first of our business cases, the European approach.
Many thanks, Lorenzo. So Edward Puig-McLean, CEO and co-founder of GNE Finance, will now present the Europace Integrated Homes Renovation Platform. Edward, please.
Thank you. Hello. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. I'm going to try to click on the slides. Oops. Okay, let's see. Now, here we go. Very well. Excellent. All right. So I will be following up with Lorenzo's presentation about business model. And actually, I will try to give you an overview of one specific example, Europace, of which I am the technical coordinator. Now, in this sense, Europace is indeed a one-stop shop, but that actually combines as well with an innovative financing mechanism. And as such, during my presentation, I will provide a special focus on the financial aspect. And at the end, of course, I'll be more than happy to take any questions. Now, before I do dive on the financing mechanism, let me first share with you our specific approach on the design of a one-stop shop. Because as entrepreneurs, when building a one-stop shop as a viable business, our main concerns could actually be summarized in a couple of questions. The first, if we build a one-stop shop, will homeowners come? And second, if homeowners come, will they be willing to pay for it? Well, we believe that this only can be the case if we, as a one-stop shop, are able to provide value to homeowners. So what we did is to go out and run a survey. We asked more than 500 homeowners of a single city. That's actually the city where we are running the pilot. And out of the results, a few things stood out about home retrofitting. It's a cumbersome process. It's complex because in the end, homeowners need to make a number of decisions. There's lack of attractive funding, and that's something I'll come back to it. And also, very interesting, there's lack of trust on contractors. So we understood that we could only create value and monetize by solving these very problems. Exactly. So therefore, WIM developed a one-stop shop addressing the needs by coupling technical assistance with affordable finance. Now, as any other one-stop shop, Europace offers several services, right? But given the results of the survey that we ran, we tend to pay special attention to customer experience. And in particular, we actually try to minimize what we call friction along the process as much as possible. Excellent. So that's why we intend to make it as easy as possible for the homeowner at every single step by helping them to make decisions, those decisions that we saw before, with trustworthy information from energy experts, by implementing quality controls, making sure contractors are qualified for the job, and all of this, very important, by using a language that homeowners understand. Because whether it's painful or not for us, especially for engineers like me, we know people don't buy energy efficiency. They rather buy comfort and well-being. So as we saw also in the results of the survey, lack of trust on contractors is a major barrier. And contractors actually happen to be a very relevant stakeholder because they are at the front line and they are a touch point for the homeowner. So therefore, at Europace, we make sure that contractors comply with what we call consumer protection policies that are also qualified for the job. We try to share references of those contractors for homeowners to evaluate previous works. And we, very importantly, monitor the quality and even ask the contractors to adhere to our code of conduct. All in all, to build the trust we know that is so important for homeowners to embark in a retrofit project. That's about technical assistance. So as for financing, maybe you noticed that previously I said affordable financing. Market research shows that there's a big part of the population that can only afford retrofitting their home if there's financing that can translate into relatively small monthly installments. So as a consequence, families' budget can deal with that. Now, for most of home retrofit measures, we know that paybacks can go up to 8, 10, or even 15 years. Now, in contrast, for an average retrofit project, which we know it's around 20, 25,000 euros, today, banks only provide consumer loans with terms of up to 3, 5, at most 7 years. And at high interest, since these projects are what we call a non-secure loan, meaning that there is no collateral that can be seized and liquidated in case of a payment default. Now, let me explain how we try to tackle this within Europace. Before I do, and before I enter into the specific of the financing, let me make first a point.
Yes, I believe we have an issue with Edward audio, so we'll try to fix this as soon as possible. Edward, unfortunately, we cannot hear you anymore. Edward, could you check your microphone because we can't hear you. Paulina, do you have an idea of how we could help Edward to get his sound back, or should we move to the next presentation while Edward fixes his audio?
Yes, please continue to the next speaker, and then we will try to fix Edward's microphone.
Okay. Okay, so very sorry for this. Looks like we have some technical issues. So in the meantime, while we try to to get Edward back in the presentation, I suggest that we move to the next presentation, and then we will come back to the Europace presentation. Sorry for this again. So I will introduce now Jo Southernwood, who is an energy consultant and project manager at the International Energy Research Center, and she will now present the Novice Enhanced Energy Performance Contracting. So Jo, the floor is yours. I think you would just have to move to your slides, which may be a bit far away.
Thank you, Karine. Yes, I'll just try and move the slides along. So thank you for inviting me to speak on the webinar this morning. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Jo Southernwood, and I'm a senior research engineer at the International Energy Research Centre. We're based in Cork in Ireland. And I'm going to talk to you about the Novice project. I'm the coordinator of the Novice project. I don't seem to be able to move the slides along. Okay. Okay, there we are. Great. Okay, so as I was saying, I am the coordinator for the Novice project. Novice is looking at the energy performance contracting business model that Lorenzo mentioned earlier, and we're looking at enhancements to that business model to make it more attractive. So specifically what we're doing is looking at combining energy efficiency measures with demand response measures via an energy performance contract to try and make it a more attractive investment opportunity for building owners and for ESCOs. So I'm going to talk to you in more detail about that this morning. Before I do, just to set the scene and give you a little bit of background, I'm sure many of you are aware that the EU has an energy efficiency target to improve energy efficiency by 32.5% by 2030, and that's now a binding target for the EU. And as Karine was saying earlier in her presentation, buildings actually account for 40% of energy consumption in Europe. And what we know from building stock analysis is that 75% of the current building stock is inefficient. And most of those buildings will still be standing in 2050. So it's really important that we make progress towards achieving energy efficient renovation throughout the building stock in Europe. But at the moment, the renovation rates are only at around 1% per year. So that's quite low. And really what we need is, as Karine mentioned, we need to get to 3% renovation rates to achieve those targets. So at the same time as the driver from the energy efficiency side, the EU is also placing more of a driver on the idea of smart buildings. And using buildings as a flexible way to manage grid demand so that supply and demand can be balanced at all times. And so Novice is really trying to combine those two elements and find a solution that combines the two. One of the interesting things that came out of a recent study in the EU is that to hit the 2030 targets, we actually need to invest 177 billion euros per year over the period 2021 to 2030, and that's really got to come from private finance. So that's an absolutely massive market opportunity there, and a really big opportunity for ESCOs and aggregators and other organisations that work in the building sector and in the energy efficiency sector. It's a great opportunity. So why are we talking about energy performance contracting anyway? To give you a bit of background about what is a performance contract and how does it work. The diagram on the screen now gives you a general overview of how a typical EPC would work. And the idea really is that if you're a building owner, and I'm not talking about the residential sector here, I'm talking really about the commercial sector and the public sector, so larger buildings. If you want to renovate your building in an energy efficient manner, it can be quite difficult because you perhaps don't have the in-house experience and the in-house personnel who are able to select things like lighting technologies, heating technologies, cooling, building energy management, and so on, because they're all quite complex and they all interact with each other. So what the client can do is engage with an energy services company who can provide an energy performance contract that will manage all of those things on behalf of the client. So typically the ESCO would handle providing finance for those projects. They may deal with the energy supplier. They will handle all the consulting and engineering that goes on in the background, the energy audits, the calculation of energy savings. They will select installers, manage the installation, and also measure and verify the results. And that's all handled under a single contract. So from the client's perspective, it makes the whole transaction much more simple because they only have a single point of contact, and that's with the ESCO. The other main advantage is that the ESCO can provide finance for those projects, so the client doesn't need to have a pot of capital, a pot of money available to finance those initiatives. And the third main advantage is that the ESCO provides the client with a performance guarantee. So they will guarantee the level of energy savings and therefore the return on investment that the client can expect to see, and how quickly the loan is paid back. And what that means from the client's point of view is that the ESCO takes the operational risk, but also the ESCO is incentivized to make sure that the energy savings are as high as they possibly can be, because the higher the energy savings, the greater the ESCO's return is going to be. So it gives the client some security that the ESCO has their best interests at heart. And what this all means is that you can achieve deeper renovations because you can take a whole building approach rather than looking at individual projects on a piecemeal basis. So that all sounds like a great idea. However, what we know is that uptake of EPCs has been very slow in many countries. And there are many reasons for this, but the main ones are listed here on the screen. EPCs, they are complex contracts because they involve organising financing. So there are many different parties involved and many different elements to the contract. So the financing, the performance guarantee, and the contract length can actually make them quite complex to administer and make it quite a lengthy process. So although another reason is that although I said that ESCOs can find finance for their clients, it can actually be quite difficult for ESCOs to access finance because loans tend to be secured on their credit rating. So finance providers tend not to secure the project against the energy savings, even though they could do, because that's just not the way they operate their loan scheme. And they're not so familiar with securing things against future energy savings. So if the ESCO takes out a loan for, say, 2 projects in the year, when they get to the third project, what the finance provider sees is that they are already in debt, and therefore they are hesitant to loan further money to their ESCO because they're already hitting a credit limit. In many countries, there's a lack of government support and really a lack of information about EPC. So clients are unfamiliar with the concept, which makes it quite difficult to sell. And also one of the biggest barriers is the contract duration. So it's very typical to see EPC contract lengths that are anywhere between 5 and 15 years. Now, in the public sector, where they know that they're going to be around and in the same building for many years, that's okay. However, in the commercial sector, that's really just too long. Really, they're looking for a return on investment within 3 years at the absolute most. So all of these can be barriers to uptake of EPCs. So how is Novice helping this situation? What Novice is looking at is we're looking at enhancing the energy performance contract. So the diagram on your screen now, the blue circles are the process that's currently used in a traditional EPC model. So finance is taken out, that money is used to implement energy efficiency measures, and that savings from energy efficiency are used to repay the finance. What Novice is doing is it's adding demand response services and revenues for providing demand response services to grid operators into that model, so that you generate a second revenue stream that can repay that initial finance. What do I mean by demand response? In case anyone is unfamiliar with the term, demand response basically is a way of shifting or reducing electricity usage during peak periods. So for the grid to operate at all times, supply must equal demand. But we know that at certain times there's a peak demand on the grid when lots of people are using electricity. So the role of a demand response aggregator is to look at the electrical assets on a client's site and identify those assets that can either be turned off or turned down for a duration of up to 2 hours in order to restore balance to the grid. And what we typically look at is things like HVAC equipment, so air handling units, combined heat and power units, compressors, pumps, generators, chillers, those kind of items that can be turned down or turned off for up to 2 hours without having a significant impact on the thermal comfort of the building occupants. And grid operators will pay for that service because it's in their interest to make sure that the grid is balanced at all times. So clients can earn a revenue simply by participating in those schemes and being available to turn down their requirements at any time. So taking a look more closely at the Novice business model then, as I said, Novice is looking at an enhanced EPC. So if you look at the diagram is mostly the same. From the client's point of view, nothing changes. They still have their EPC with the ESCO. The ESCO is still their main point of contact, and the ESCO still handles all of the works and all of the complexity that sits behind the contract. So for the client, nothing changes. However, what we've added is this idea of a memorandum of understanding that exists between the ESCO and the demand response aggregator. Because what needs to happen is the aggregator needs to work with the ESCO to access the client site and use the building management system to turn down the relevant equipment at the right times. And so what this does is it creates a second revenue stream from demand response that the ESCO can use to improve the flexibility of the client's building and enhance their energy efficiency measures. And so what we're doing with Novice is looking at how does that contractual arrangement work in practice, that arrangement between ESCO and aggregator. What does it look like? What are the key performance indicators that will be affected? And how does this affect the relationship between ESCO and clients? One of the critical things that we need to be aware of is that EPCs always include performance guarantee. So the ESCO has guaranteed that they will achieve a certain comfort level and reduce energy savings at the same time. And that's quite predictable if you're dealing with energy efficiency measures. However, when you introduce demand response measures into the mix, it's impossible to predict when those demand response events might happen and how frequently they will happen. So there's kind of a mismatch there between the performance and the level of certainty that you can provide, and we need contractual arrangements that allow for that flexibility. So typically what we're looking at is a contract that allows comfort levels to drift outside of the main bands but still within acceptable levels only during a demand response event and the recovery period to allow this type of contract to work in practice. So if we look at the finance, how does this affect the finance and the contract length? On the left-hand side, you see a chart that deals with financing for traditional energy performance contract model. And the vertical axis of the chart shows the energy and operational costs of the building, and the horizontal axis of the chart shows the duration of the contract in years. So what you can see is that at the beginning of the contract, which is when the energy efficiency measures are installed, the operational cost of the building drops, and over the duration of the contract, the savings that are represented by the red box are used to repay the finance for those measures. And at the end of the contract, all of those savings go to the customer. So if we look at the enhanced energy performance contract model, which is shown by the graph on the right-hand side, what you can see is that the red box stays the same, so the energy efficiency measures still reduce energy bills, but what we have in addition is this orange box, which represents the revenues that the client would receive or the ESCO would receive for participating in the demand response market. So overall, the total operational cost of the building drops much further in the Novice model compared to the traditional model. And what that means is that the duration of the contract can be shorter. Now, what we're investigating in Novice is how much of an impact does this have? So by how much could we reduce contract length? And unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you right at this moment because we're still in the middle of the project. We still have a year to run. So we're still testing. So if you talk to me in 12 months' time, hopefully I'll have an answer to that question. But you can see that in theory, the duration should be shorter and the customer should receive greater revenues earlier than they would do with a traditional EPC. So one of the things that we've done with Novice is take a look at the market readiness for this business model. And what we found is that it varies greatly across the EU because different countries have different levels of market maturity, both from the ESCO and the EPC side and also from the demand response side. And it's actually quite difficult to find a country that has both a well-developed ESCO market and a demand response market that's open and accessible to demand response aggregators. So what we found is that the most likely countries where this would work right now are France, the UK and Ireland, whereas, for example, in Spain and Italy, this isn't possible at the moment because demand response aggregation isn't legal yet. So they're not allowed to aggregate that demand response, which means that we couldn't realistically operate the Novice model in those countries. So we've done a lot of analysis on this, and if you're interested in this market analysis, we have more details on the Novice website. In summary then, there are many benefits of the Novice model and the enhanced EPC model, both for ESCOs and aggregators and for the building owners. From the ESCO and aggregators point of view, it's an interesting one because it gives them a unique selling point. Some of the markets in Europe, particularly on the ESCO side, the markets can be quite crowded. For example, in France and Italy, they have very well developed ESCO markets. So a Novice style approach can give them a USP. It could also allow them to access new markets. So typically ESCOs and aggregators operate in different sectors. ESCOs have traditionally been working consistently in the public sector, whereas aggregators tend to look for large industrial clients. So by working together, they may be able to access new markets. As I've already mentioned, they can reduce contract lengths and improve the return on investment, which means they should be able to attract new clients and more clients. And they should be able to finance more projects because they can because they can get through the contracts more quickly. So it's a really low risk way for them to expand and a low risk way for them to bring a new skill set into their business. From the building owner's point of view, the advantages of the traditional EPC remain. However, what we see is that the payback period is reduced and therefore the contract duration is shorter, which makes it much more attractive to commercial clients. It also allows some additional benefits beyond energy efficiency to be realised by the building owners. So, for example, at the end of the project, they will end up with a building that is smarter and more flexible, which should, in theory, improve occupant comfort because they should have better control of the temperature in all of the different areas of the building. And some research that I've come across suggests that it should increase the asset value because the building is more controllable and more comfortable for people to work in. It makes it a more attractive building from a value point of view. And it reduces the administrative burden because the building owner doesn't need to contract separately with an energy efficiency provider and a demand response provider. It can all go through a single contract. And what we hope is that all of those benefits would lead to increased renovation rates throughout Europe. So that's just about it from me at the moment. The last thing I wanted to say was that if any of you online are thinking about energy efficiency and demand response projects, Novice is looking for demonstrator sites. All we really need is some data from the building that covers energy consumption and any participation in demand response. We need to know about the energy consumption side and the revenue stream side so that we can validate the business model. So if you are considering a project of that nature or you're already involved in one, then please do get in touch. My details are on the last slide. But that's it from me for the time being. Thank you very much for listening. I am going to hand you back to Karine.
Many thanks, Joe, for this very interesting presentation on the Novice project and the business model you are developing. It's really interesting. And I'm just checking if Edward is back, but apparently still having issues with the audio. So I fear that we won't be able to show his presentation, which is really a shame. He will try to reboot his computer and come back. So hopefully we can go back to his slides at the end. Very, very sorry for this. In the meantime, while we wait for hopefully his comeback, I suggest that we move to the last slides of the presentations, and then we will come back to his to the Europe presentation if it's possible. Okay, so about conclusions of this webinar. So as we have seen, innovative business models and smart financing are required to support and accelerate the deep renovation of the EU building stock, which is only at a rate of 1% today and should go up to 3%. To be rolled out in an optimal way, business model must be chosen depending on the country and its legal, fiscal and market context, but also according to the typology of buildings and the type of ownership, whether it's private, public, with a co-ownership or not. Today we have explored not two, but 1.5 of these business models. Hopefully we'll be able to completely review Europace later on. These two business models present a rather complementary coverage, both in terms of market readiness, but also in terms of types of building covered. As we have seen, Novice is covering public and commercial buildings, while Europace is covering residential buildings. If we add to this other promising business models that were quickly outlined by Lorenzo, the landscape is very rich. And so there is a really huge potential for better replicating these business models. We can also derive key elements that impact the success of a business model. So what should be taken into account by a successful business model? First, a business model should be user-centered with a people-centric approach. It should allow its customers to move from pains to gains, and in particular, attention should focus more broadly on the multiple benefits of energy renovation and disconnect from the two classic kilowatt-hour and payback rationale. Co-benefits such as comfort and health should be taken into account. This was already mentioned by Edward. Also, these business models should develop collaboration models at all levels. First, by tying partnerships between manufacturers, but also by involving third parties, such as banks or ESCO that will provide financial supports. Also for economies of scales, alliances can be very instrumental. Finally, raising awareness is key through pilot projects and then through the promotion of replication. Finally, business models should cover the whole value chain from planning to operation, including quality control. Implementing a holistic and integrated approach is really key in order to deliver a customized service package that will attract customers. Okay, so as well, to finish on these conclusions, you can access all this information that has been provided presented by Lorenzo and I through the Renovation Hub. So the Renovation Hub presents a variety of business models that can be used to finance energy renovation. Its objective is to guide the users to find those that are the most adapted, depending on the country and the building typology. It also provides recommendations for application and illustrates the application of most promising business models through case studies. So you have here a snapshot of our website. You can also contribute to this platform. The objective is to have something that's collaborative. So if you want to share your success story, your renovation case, or if you want to advertise an innovative business model that we may have missed or present a new refurbishment package, or if you just want to follow the progress of the project and attend our next workshops and webinars, you can become a stunning stakeholder and join our community. You have the link here. And then this will enable you to contribute to the Renovation Hub by publishing articles, for example. Then as Lorenzo mentioned, we are also looking for case studies. So if you have any data or demonstration you would like to share with us, we'll be very happy to hear from you. About upcoming webinars, so we'll organize the 3 other webinars. The next one in May will be on integrated, adaptable and affordable refurbishment packages. So this one will focus on the technological solutions themselves, but with a systemic approach, in the sense that we look at packages and not isolated solutions. Then the work we have done on the review and contextualization of barrier to the deep renovation of the building stock will be presented in June, and we'll present all stunning results in September. And a final announcement about our final conference, which will take place on the 18th of September in Paris. We will organize this final event jointly with other projects that are dealing with deep renovation, either from a business model side or from a technological side. So if any of you is involved in a project, such a project that hasn't been invited yet, please get in touch. Thanks for your attention. Before we move to questions, we'll check last time if Edward is back to the webinar, and if yes, if he can take over the presentation and start where he stopped earlier. Edward, did you manage to come back? I don't think he did. Okay, so well, again, my apologies for this technological issue. So I suggest that we move to questions, and hopefully in the meantime, Edward will be back, and we will finish on his presentation then. Okay, so we are now ready to take your questions. So I've received some of them, which I will redistribute to to speakers. So the first question, Lorenzo, this one is for you. Could you mention, or have you identified some bad practices, for example, business models that have failed, and which could help pointing out errors to avoid in the future, or how to or unexpected barriers that may have come up?
Yes. So we have mapped also the barriers, so the bad practices and the bad solutions for that influence in a negative way the implementation of business models. They have been called barriers. We have divided them into two big categories. That are the barriers that limited the uptake of refurbishment solutions at the decision-making level for homeowners. So they are likely to be found in most of regions, and they include behavioral barriers and also technical ones. The complete description of the barriers identified will be part of will be the core of the presentation that will be held in the June webinar. The other typology of barriers are that the barriers that prevent the replication of successful business models, so are basically regulatory barriers and financial ones, so that are strictly dependent on country regulations and country level legislative framework. And a final typology of barrier is the informative ones, so where the awareness level is low and the possible stakeholders are not aware of what business model could be implemented.
Okay, thanks, Lorenzo. The second question is for Joe. With regard to the barriers to energy performance contracting, the question is how to deal with energy savings measures that are in the hands of clients and users, while it's the ESCO that should ensure the performance.
Thanks for that question. Yeah, it's a very good question actually, and an interesting one. So it normally what happens with an EPC is that the ESCO will set a baseline. So they'll take a year's worth of data and they'll set a baseline, and that will be including things like corrections for the weather, corrections for the number of building occupants or the number of building users, or production levels, if that's applicable. But of course, you can't control what the client does, and sometimes changes do happen in buildings that mean that the energy consumption changes in an unexpected way. Normally what happens in an EPC is that those conditions are defined at the contract stage. So the level of occupancy that's expected, the number of employees, the level of production, those kind of things are normally defined at the contract stage and are part of that contract definition for this very reason, so that in the case where energy performance hasn't improved as much as expected, the ESCO can demonstrate the reasons why they haven't achieved that saving. And if it can be shown that the reason is because occupancy has changed, or the client previously didn't use a whole floor of the building and now they're using that additional floor, if that can be proven that it's client related, the ESCO should still be able to demonstrate that they have performed as they said they would and as expected. However, what that depends on is having robust measurement and verification processes. And I think that at the moment that step is lacking in many EPCs. So there are measurement and verification standards, and there are organisations that can implement robust M&V processes. Often that step is missed, or it isn't done in rigorous enough detail, and that's where the problems occur. So I think that to overcome this barrier, really, we need to, as an industry and as a sector, really get better at taking robust baselines and taking robust measurement and verification measures during the contract and after the contract to ensure that we can deal with these issues as they arise.
Many thanks, Joe. I will answer the third question, but Joe, if you wish to complete, please feel free. So the third question is, what is the role of scale? Cost prices of renovations drop when scale increases. How will that change the business models? So I think this the role of scale can be well illustrated by the energy strong business model, which has been first deployed in the Netherlands, if I'm correct, and which is now being replicated to UK and France. And this business model relies on renovating a lot of similar houses at the same time in order to be able to have a large enough number of houses that will enable the manufacturers to have economies of scale and to be able to deliver more cost-effective solutions. Especially as in the case of energy strong, usually houses with very similar typologies are targeted. It was terraced houses to start with, so the economies of scale were really obvious, and it helped to decrease the cost of refurbishment a long time and to make it easier to finance. I hope it answers the question. Joe, I don't know if on your side you have anything else to add on this.
Well, I would agree with you, Corinne, that it's important to consider the renovation replication potential, and it's a similar story with the Novice model as well. Although we're not looking at residential units and the commercial side of things, often buildings are quite different. There are certainly similarities between the types of building that you could renovate. So, for example, one of our case studies looks at leisure centres, and we've taken one of our demo cases is looking at 3 leisure centres in Dublin, but Dublin has about 30 leisure centres. So what we're looking at is, well, how much of what we've done at these 3 large leisure centres could be replicated across the others? And if we can then demonstrate that and prove it in one city, there's no reason why we couldn't take the same approach in another city. Yeah, I agree with what Corinne said, that will improve the economies of scale. By doing it that way will improve the financing and improve the potential for the business model.
Okay, thanks, Joe. We don't have any other questions to address. Well, there was a comment asking if we are interacting with the EMAP. We have been in touch, have met no further cooperation yet, but it's on our to-do list. Okay, if there are no other questions, since we haven't managed to get Edward back online. Oh, actually he is now. Edward, are you back?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Oh, brilliant, there you are. Great to hear you.
Fine.
Okay, so well, Edward, I don't know if for you it's possible to restart where you stopped.
I don't even know where you lost me.
I think we lost you while you were going from the slide on the trust of contractors. You were moving to the other slide.
Okay.
So I suggest that we finish on your slides, and if there is a specific question for you, we will take it, and then we will end the webinar.
Sure.
Yes, that's this one. Perfect. Thanks, Edward.
I'm trying to make a transition now. Yeah, so I think I was coming from the point in which once I had described the technical assistance that we can offer from Europace, the key idea was to dive into the financial innovation. But before making the comment on the financial innovation, I wanted to give some framework about how we are tackling this aspect of the innovation, which is basically first by making a statement, as you can see on the slide, in which we believe that renovation is not anymore a private business, but actually is a public of matter interest. And in this sense, we think that local authorities, and in particular municipalities, should have an active role into this. And now I want to stress this aspect of the active role, because this active role from the local authority is what articulates our innovation in the financial mechanism. So moving on to the next slide. Exactly. So basically what we propose at Europace financing mechanism is on the collection aspect of it. To make the financing affordable, we mean two things. It needs to be low interest and it needs to be long term, because we know that most of the measures on home retrofitting projects tend to be of 8, 10, 15 or even more years of payback. And today we know that banks, for an average project retrofit, which is around 20,000–25,000 euro, banks only provide financing which is relatively expensive, and the terms of repayment are very short. Therefore, this makes that if a homeowner embarks on a retrofit project with bank lending, the monthly installments end up being very high, and therefore disincentivizing homeowners from engaging with financing. Now, going back to the active role of the local government, private investors, knowing that the local government can have that active role that I was explaining before, they can feel more comfort and trust that in case of any problem with the payment, be it late payment or payment default, they trust that the local authorities can have that active role in the collection process, because local authorities have very well established and robust collection mechanisms through tax collection. So what we propose at Europace, and that's what we are doing, is that those municipalities willing to have that active role, because they believe in that they have to do something when it comes to home retrofitting, so they do this, they participate in this collection mechanism. And with this, there is a very interesting consequence and very important one in the home retrofitting aspect, which is that by the local government having that active role, de facto, that loan, that financing becomes attached to the house and not to the owner. And in practical terms, this means that in case of a sale, the homeowner sells the house, that loan, that debt remains with the property and the new owner will take over the payments. So in practice, this means that if I am a homeowner and I consider a project retrofit that may take 10, 12 years to pay back, by using this kind of mechanism, financing mechanism, I know that if in 2 years I move out of my home, I'm free of continue paying that financing. Very well, moving on. So on the next slides, I'm showing a few of the features of this kind of financing, but the one I wanted to stress is that it's very long-term and that it stays attached to the property and therefore can transfer to the next owner. And we are doing this in the framework of a European project. We are doing this pilot, the second pilot already in the north of Barcelona. And in parallel, we are about to finish a research across all Europe, all the 28 member states, to find out in which countries local authorities can have that active role. And knowing that, on the third phase of the project, we will go and find leader cities, as we call them, willing to replicate the pilot project in their own city. And therefore, those cities having that active role and us setting up the one-stop shop in partnership with the local authorities. As for what's going on across Europe, the results of the study are pretty much available. So we have identified the 7 countries you can see on the slide as suitable countries in Europe to replicate Europace, meaning that the local authorities could have that active role, and all that is needed for Europace to be replicated is pretty much in place. Being mindful of the time, I will move a little forward in the presentation. Practically, yes, to finish. So I would like to take this opportunity to ask any city representative to join our community. Then you can see the information at the bottom of the slide. And also to let you know that on June 19, while the European Sustainability Week, we will run our second summit dedicated to cities, in which we can foster several discussions with city representatives and one-stop shops to enrich this debate on how to implement successful and economically viable one-stop shops across Europe. And I think that with this, I can come to a close in my accidented presentation, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions from here.
Thanks, Edward, and thanks for the really interesting presentation despite the, the technical hiccup. But you did it in the end, so perfect. And I have a question for you, which is about the role of the local authority in collecting the money and how it transfers the loan from the owner to the house. If you could clarify this point, please.
That's actually a very important point, and I appreciate your question, because this very much depends on the national legislation. The way the conduit, as we call it, that we can build through the local authority can have several shapes and forms, depending actually on what the legislation on each country allows the local authority to do. For instance, in the case of Spain, we found out that combining existing already certain pieces of legislation, the local authority, and more precisely the local tax authority, can play that active role, but only under certain circumstances. And secondly, in the case of Spain, which is the pilot we are running, the collection on a day-to-day basis is not done by the local authority. The local authority only steps in case of any default on the payment or on any delay, because that makes the whole process, at least given the specific national legislation, easier to implement and puts less stress in this case to the local authority. So, but the effect is actually the same, because investors, knowing that in the case of any event, the local authority can step in and implement their processes and procedures, it's actually accomplishing the same purpose, which is to provide comfort to the investors that that payment is most likely the most secure possible. Did I answer to your question?
Well, on my side, yes, I hope it answered the question. Apparently it did. Yes, yes. So yes, perfect. Thanks a lot, Edward. I don't think there are any other questions for you. No, I think we have exhausted the list of questions. So I would like to first thank the speakers for the very interesting presentations, and I now would like to thank the audience for your participations and for the very useful questions you raised. So I hope our webinar was of interest, and that you will follow the next ones, or at least follow the progress of Stunning, of Novice and Eurobase. Thanks a lot.